Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." Why am I starting with this quote? Because today we're talking about something important. There's a documentary called Honeyland. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. But even if you haven't seen it, don't worry. You can still watch this video. Because today we're not just talking about one thing. We're talking about documentaries, fairy tales, and something in psychology called resilience, the kind of people who never break, no matter what. You know those punching dolls that pop back up no matter how hard you hit them? That's what resilient people are like. What makes them so strong? What gives them this incredible mental toughness? That's what we're diving into today. First, let's talk about resilience. What is resilience exactly? You could call it psychological endurance, mental toughness, or simply the ability to stay strong in the face of challenges. I personally like to compare it to a bamboo tree. You know how bamboo bends and sways with the wind but never breaks? No matter how much pressure it faces, it always bounces back to its original form. If you haven't watched Honeyland, go watch it. Seriously, just see how Hatice lives. Witness her resilience firsthand. And if you've ever seen the movie adaptation of Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne, there's this one scene that makes you feel Orientalism down to your bones. Now, let me tell you what went through my mind while watching this. Why are people so unhappy? Why are so many struggling with depression, eating disorders, and other psychological illnesses? Why do we spend most of our time drowning in anxiety, guilt, regret, and constant worry? And why are we never satisfied? At least for those of you listening, I wonder, were the first humans actually living in a more peaceful state than we are now? About 350 years ago, the French philosopher Pascal said something interesting. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. I want you to think about that for a moment. We are a society of unhappy people who have everything. I mean, yes, we all struggle in life, but not like Hatice. Hatice is the main character of the documentary. Her only source of income is beekeeping. She gathers honey and tries to sell it in Skopje, all while taking care of her bedridden mother. She lives in a tiny one-room house with no electricity, no running water, and just a single stove to keep warm. And yet, despite all these hardships, she enjoys life. She plays with children. She sings songs. She cares for animals, showing them love and kindness. And now, every time I see people around me complaining about the smallest inconveniences, I know that her life, the way she lives with resilience and gratitude, will always stay in my mind. You know how some people turn even the most trivial things into a personal trauma? They obsess over it, stress about it, and let it consume them. Honestly, whenever I see someone like that, I just think, that's your big problem, seriously. And then, there are people who go through unimaginable hardships, things that would break most of us. You look at them and think, if I had to go through that, I wouldn't survive. Yet somehow they don't break, they don't collapse, they stand tall. In psychology, this is called resilience. Guys, I'll get to my point in a second, but two examples popped into my head that perfectly fit what I'm about to say. First, let me tell you about this one person. I have a friend who's a makeup artist. One day, a girl comes in to get her makeup done. My friend works her magic, does an amazing job, and when the girl looks in the mirror, she absolutely loves it. But then, she lights a cigarette, takes a deep, dramatic drag, and suddenly, she starts crying. Why? Because apparently the last time she got her makeup done somewhere else, the makeup artist messed up her false lashes, and that was just too much for her to handle. Honestly, just the fact that this was a real-life event, yeah, I think that is my mini trauma. Because seriously, that was her big crisis. Now let me tell you about the second story, one of those that make you go, there's a woman I love dearly, and for a special reason, I call her Mum. Why? Because she buried all 8 of her children, one after another. One passed away from leukemia at 17. Another from an unknown illness at just 5.5 years old. 8 children gone. And yet she's still standing. She once told me, "Sweetheart, I still have breath in my body. What else can I do? I have no choice but to keep going. I have to stand tall." Look, I just told you about 2 very different kinds of people. One cries over a badly applied fake eyelash. The other buries 8 children and still stands tall, fighting for life every single day. Kafka once said, "With the energy I need to hold myself together and keep going, I could build pyramids." Some people let the smallest inconveniences break them. Others carry unimaginable pain and still move forward. Before we get into Honeyland, I want to tell you about 2 other documentaries. The first one is Land Without Bread, Las Hurdes, directed by the Spanish filmmaker Luis Buñuel. I'm a huge fan of this mad genius. This was Buñuel's first and only documentary, filmed in 1933. It was even banned for a while. Why am I recommending this? Because it's a documentary that gives you a raw, unfiltered look at history, sociology, and culture, just like Honeyland. Watching this, I understood what malaria, dysentery, goiter, and salt deficiency actually meant. It's a brutal, unsentimental look at poverty, ignorance, and disease. And yes, there's that one scene with the donkey. You'll hate it. Buñuel clearly had something against donkeys. As a child, he once saw a donkey torn apart on the side of the road. That image never left his mind, and later he put it in his films. Trauma? Maybe. Now let's talk about another documentary. This one is from 1922, directed by Robert Flaherty. often called the father of documentary filmmaking. It's Nanook of the North. In this film, you witness Nanook and his family struggling to survive in the Arctic, completely isolated from modern civilization. It's an ethnographic documentary, a raw look into the traditional life of the Inuit people. And speaking of that, here's a quick note. We should say Inuit instead of Eskimo. It's kind of like using outdated racial terms. Many Inuit people find Eskimo offensive. Now, why am I even talking about Nanook of the North? What kind of life motto did Nanook have that kept him going with the same enthusiasm every single day? How did he wake up every morning and fight so hard, just for food and survival? Imagine living the exact same routine every day, and look at what his family owned, just the bare essentials. A knife, a stone bowl, a spear, and the bare skin on their backs. That's it, nothing more. So, after spending 2 whole years living with Nanook and his family, the director finally finishes the film. He gets on a ship, lights up a cigarette, and boom, the entire film burns down. Can you believe that? But instead of giving up, he just goes, all right then, I'll do it all over again. The directors of Honeyland did something similar. They spent 3 years living in a remote village in North Macedonia, capturing every moment. And honestly, looking at these films now, it was all worth it. Speaking of nature and animals, I recently watched an interactive film on Netflix called You vs. Wild. And while watching, I couldn't help but think, how great would it be if life worked the same way? Imagine if we could just press a button and see the outcomes of our choices in advance. Like, if you take this path, here's what will happen. If you grab that water, here's what's coming next. It would make life so much easier, right? Now, let's talk about Honeyland. This documentary was pieced together from over 400 hours of footage, resulting in an 87-minute visual masterpiece. The lighting, absolutely stunning. The contrast, the colors, everything is just perfect. And while watching, I kept thinking about those candlelit night scenes with the mother and daughter.
Işığı görüyor musun?
Görüyorum. Çenesizce. Bu gözüm görüyor, bu görüm.
Yarın çıkarayım. Oldu 3 sene çıkarmadan çıkacağız dışarı yarın güneşe.
Çıkamaz, çıkamam. Çıkarırsan sen beni yani. Ben ozon gibi olmuşum.
I thought, if Caravaggio were alive today, he'd be in this remote Macedonian village painting Hatice's portrait.
Ölmem kızım da ölmem. Nasıl kızım seni çektireceğim. Ölmem kızım.
When you see visuals like this, you can't help but wonder, what kind of equipment did they use? So I looked it up, and honestly, compared to today's standards, their gear was pretty outdated. But remember what I said in a previous video, use whatever you have to the best of your ability, push it to its limits, and eventually, something better will come your way. That's exactly what they did. They worked with passion, despite having limited tools, and that's why the film looks as breathtaking as it does. When I watch it, I don't just see beautiful cinematography. I see their dedication, their obsession with capturing something real. By now, you already know that the main character of this documentary is Hatice, or should I say Bee Hatice? Because if there's anyone who truly embodies the phrase hardworking like a bee, it's her. Hatice lives in a remote, almost forgotten village in North Macedonia, practicing beekeeping the traditional way, and her relationship with nature and her bees, it's almost symbiotic. Normally, when we think of beekeepers, we imagine them dressed like astronauts, covered from head to toe in protective gear. But Hatice, she doesn't even wear gloves. And Hatice doesn't keep her beehives in the usual way. No neat wooden boxes in a garden. No, she hides them in the most unexpected places, beyond the mountains, inside stone walls, tucked away in hidden corners. I've never seen beekeeping like this before. And when she harvests the honey, she doesn't take it all. Instead, she whispers to the bees, half for you, half for me. She sings to them, talks to them, and always leaves them enough honey to survive. Just look at how she respects the delicate balance of nature. As a child, she couldn't even eat honey. We were too poor, she says. And that's exactly why she became a beekeeper, to finally enjoy honey without limits. That was her dream, and now she's living it. But even after achieving her dream, look at how she treats the bees. She's up there on top of a mountain. Who's going to hold her accountable? The bees? No one would know if she took it all. She sings to them, talks to them, and always leaves them enough honey to survive. Just look at how she respects the delicate balance of nature. So by now, you've figured out that Hatice is the good cop in this story. But of course, every story needs a bad cop too. Enter the greedy nomad who moves into the village. His mindset? How can I squeeze the most out of an animal? How do I make the most profit off its back? He takes a little but demands a lot, giving with a spoon, taking with a shovel. Now, compare the way he treats his animals to what eventually happens to him. There's a difference, a big one. And here's the thing. Hatice is such a kind-hearted person that she even tries to teach this greedy man how to keep bees the right way. She patiently shows him how to do it without harming the bees, without disrupting nature's balance. She even cares for his kids, welcomes his family with an open heart. But in return, she gets stabbed in the back. Blinded by greed, the man starves his bees, thinking he can make more money that way. And because of his reckless actions, Hatice's bees, her lifeline, end up dying too. There's a quote from Buddha that perfectly fits this moment. Conquer anger with love, evil with good, greed with generosity, and lies with truth. And then you see how the smallest things bring Hatice so much joy, and it just gets you emotional. She goes to the city to sell honey, stops by a store, and starts looking at hair dyes, wondering which color to choose. Then she comes home, excited to dye her hair. There's no such thing as being happy with little things. Anything that truly makes you happy is already something big. That's exactly how Hatice lives her life. When you look at the things that bring her joy, you realize they're things money can't buy, and at that moment, you can't help but reflect on your own life. You can take countless lessons from Honeyland, but to me, Hatice is the perfect embodiment of psychological resilience, the ability to endure, to stand strong, to keep going despite hardships. And at this point, I want to open a small parenthesis. I believe people fall into two categories. Let me give you an example. Stefan Zweig. If you remember, he was Jewish, and when war broke out, he managed to escape from the Nazis and flee to Brazil, but he fell into such deep despair that he took his own life along with his wife. Then there's Viktor Frankl, a Jewish doctor. He couldn't escape. He was captured and sent to a concentration camp where he endured unimaginable suffering. He watched his family being murdered right before his eyes. In the end, Zweig chose death. Frankl chose life. Now I want you to sit with this thought for a moment. Why did Stefan Zweig take his own life? And despite everything, how did Viktor Frankl find the strength to hold on? At this point, I want to remind you of something I mentioned at the beginning. Nietzsche's words. He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow. Any. So how do we find that why? Well, if we break down Viktor Frankl's book to its core, let me give you 3 key points. The first one, work, creating something, engaging in a craft, keeping yourself busy. The second one, experience, living through something, connecting with people, nature, or animals, just staying engaged with life. And the third, final point, if there is pain, one you cannot escape, you must develop a response to it. In other words, sometimes the only way to live is to hold on to your pain and carry it with purpose. I hope that in this journey of life, we never overlook the impact of our choices, whether short-term or long-term, on nature, people, and animals. And I hope we can apply the wisdom we've learned from Hatice to our own lives. I hope we all find our why. Take care and see you next time.